On a crowded bus, the murmur of the city's noise was suddenly pierced by a harsh, cold voice. "You don't belong here. Go back to Africa." The words sliced through the hum of voices and the soft rumble of the engine, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. The air in the bus seemed to thicken, as if the oppressive weight of those words had pressed down on everyone inside. Most passengers turned away, pretending they hadn't heard, as though ignoring the comment would make it vanish. But Isaiah Lynch, 17, couldn't ignore it. He had heard it before, perhaps not in those exact words, but in countless other ways. He had heard it in the sideways glances, in the cautious steps people took when they passed him on the street, in the unspoken tension when people saw him, a young black man, entering a room. Today, however, something shifted within him. It wasn't just the words. It was a quiet that followed, the expectation that someone would just let it go. The bus swayed as it turned onto Saffron Boulevard, its windows streaked with the wet remnants of a recent rain. The air inside the bus was thick with the smell of damp clothes and the faint scent of cheap cologne. The passengers around Isaiah fidgeted, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke. The weight of the moment was suffocating, and as always, Isaiah kept his eyes on the ground, pretending to be absorbed in his phone. He wasn't ready for a confrontation, but deep down, he knew he wouldn't walk away from this one. That Marlene Wilkes, a middle-aged woman sitting across from Isaiah, caught his attention. Her sharp gaze, directed at him for just a moment, felt more like an accusation than anything else. She was staring straight ahead, her lips tightly pressed together, her posture rigid. It wasn't the first time he'd seen that look, the look of someone who had already made their judgment, who saw him as a threat, simply because of the color of his skin. He tried to ignore her, to lose himself in the bustling noise of the city, but her words continued to echo in his mind. "This city is falling apart," Marlene muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, her eyes flicking toward him. "These kids, they think they could take everything over." Her words hung in the air like poison, spreading through the bus. A few heads turned toward her, but no one said anything. No one dared. Marlene continued, oblivious to the silence she was creating. "We all know where they come from," she said, her voice colder now. "They don't belong here. They should go back to Africa." The words struck Isaiah like a slap in the face. His pulse quickened, his fingers tightening around his phone. He had heard this before, too many times. But today was different. He wasn't going to let it slide. Not today. The bus was tense, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Isaiah and Marlene. A few others stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice, as if by ignoring the situation, they could make it disappear. Isaiah could feel the stares, some sympathetic, some nervous, and others filled with expectation. They were waiting for him to react. He exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. His mother had always told him, "Choose your battles." But today wasn't one of those days where he could walk away. He wasn't going to stay silent, not this time. Isaiah lifted his gaze, meeting Marlene's eyes. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it, a quiet power that sliced through the silence of the bus. "What did you just say?" His words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of years of quiet suffering, years of being ignored, dismissed, or worse, judged simply because of who he was. Marlene's eyes flickered, and for the first time, her composure wavered. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him, as though trying to gauge whether he was serious, whether he would back down. Like everyone else had, Isaiah didn't blink. He wasn't afraid. He had learned long ago that fear was the weapon people, like Marlene, used to control others. But he wasn't going to let her use it on him. "I just want to make sure you heard yourself," he said, his voice steady. "I want to make sure you understand exactly what you just said." Marlene's grip on her handbag tightened, her knuckles white, but she didn't speak. The bus was completely still now, the weight of the moment pressing down on every person inside. For a brief moment, Isaiah saw a flicker of something in Marlene's eyes, a hesitation, a flash of doubt. She wasn't used to someone standing up to her. She wasn't used to someone refusing to back down. Isaiah's mind briefly flashed back to his childhood, to his mother's lessons about standing tall and speaking out. He had spent his whole life trying to make himself small, trying to avoid confrontation. But today, he wasn't going to shrink. He wasn't going to allow the world to silence him. Marlene slowly shifted in her seat, her lips curling into a tight frown. "You heard me," she muttered, but there was no conviction in her voice, no confidence. Just a hollow defensiveness that only highlighted her insecurity. Isaiah didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. The damage had been done. The words were out there. But now, everyone on the bus had heard them. And even if they chose to stay silent, they couldn't pretend they hadn't been part of it. They couldn't unhear the truth. As the bus approached the next stop, Isaiah stood up, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't look back at Marlene. He didn't need to. He knew he had made his point. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the start of something new. And as he stepped off the bus into the wet, gray streets of Saffron Boulevard, he couldn't help but wonder, would anyone else ever speak up? Would anyone else ever have the courage to stand against the hatred that ran so deep in the city? Would they see what he had seen, that the silence was more dangerous than the words themselves? He didn't know, but he hoped that one day, someone else would. Isaiah Lynch did not expect what happened next, but then again, life often didn't give you time to prepare. His body moved before his mind could catch up to the situation. The thief had swiped Marlene's handbag, and the instant it happened, Isaiah leapt from his seat. It wasn't for Marlene. It was for something deeper, something his mother had always taught him. Never let anyone think you don't care. He chased the thief, who was surprisingly slow, slipping on the slick pavement just in front of Isaiah. That brief stumble was all Isaiah needed. He reached out and grabbed the thief's wrist, twisting it until the bag was freed. The thief hesitated, meeting Isaiah's eyes. The unspoken resolve in Isaiah's gaze made the thief back off, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Isaiah didn't care about the thief anymore. His job was done. He turned back to the bus, breathing heavily, his chest tight. He had done what was right, not because Marlene deserved it, but because it was a matter of principle. He tossed the handbag onto the seat next to her, without so much as a glance in her direction. But then, something caught his attention. Something he didn't expect. A photograph slipped out of the bag, crumpling slightly as it landed on the floor. Isaiah picked it up and saw two children smiling up at the camera, a white girl and a black boy. The faded ink on the back read, "James, Marlene, best friends forever." He looked at Marlene. Her face froze, her eyes wide, lips pressed so tight they trembled slightly. Her body was rigid, gripping the seat in front of her, as if it was the only thing that could hold her steady. The photograph was a symbol of something lost, something she had buried deep inside her, something she didn't want to remember. Isaiah understood. He understood that she hadn't always been like this, that once she had a friend named James, a friend she had been forced to lose, or perhaps had chosen to lose. But either way, he was gone. He saw the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to take the photo, hide it, bury it, erase it just as she had erased James from her life. But there was something else there, something she couldn't deny. Without saying a word, Isaiah held out the photo. The silence between them stretched on. Marlene's gaze shifted between the photo and his face, and for a long moment, she didn't move. Finally, slowly, she took the photo from him, her fingers barely touching his as she accepted it. There was no denial in her actions, no justification, no words, just an understanding. The tension in the air shifted. The heavy silence of indifference that had filled the bus since Marlene's words was replaced by something different. A ripple spread across the rows of seats, as if everyone felt it, though no one spoke. Isaiah didn't know if anyone would remember this moment when they left the bus, but he knew they had seen. They had heard. And once you see, once you hear, you can't pretend you never knew. Isaiah stood up and slung his backpack over his shoulder. He didn't look back at Marlene. He didn't need to. As he stepped off the bus, a voice called out from behind him, "Hey, kid." Isaiah turned to see the construction worker from earlier. The man wasn't smiling, but there was something different in his eyes, a look of thoughtfulness, as if he had been reflecting on something, maybe even on his own silence. He gave Isaiah a small, deliberate nod. Isaiah returned the nod, then turned and walked away. As he passed by the back row, a teenage girl whispered to her friend, "I'll never be like her." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for Marlene to hear. She didn't respond, but Isaiah noticed her fingers tightening around the photo, gripping it with a newfound force. She didn't stare off into space anymore. She was looking at the picture, looking at her younger self, looking at James's smile. Marlene didn't say anything. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just sat there, And for the first time in years, her silence wasn't certain. It was full of doubt. It was full of hesitation. Isaiah didn't care if Marlene changed. That wasn't his responsibility. But he knew one thing for certain. He had made people think. And sometimes that's where change begins. Society doesn't change in a day. Prejudices, the words Marlene had spoken, had existed for decades, even centuries. And sometimes people choose to remain silent, to pretend they didn't hear or didn't see. But Isaiah knew that if everyone stayed silent, injustice would never end. He wasn't a hero, and he hadn't tried to change the world in a single moment. He had just done what was right. That was enough to create a shift, a crack in the way people thought. Maybe Marlene wouldn't change, but maybe someone else on that bus would. Maybe next time, when faced with a similar moment, they wouldn't stay silent. And what about you? If you were on that bus, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, pretending not to hear? Or would you have spoken up, like Isaiah did?